Hi, welcome to the Amy Cogswell Garden at the Webb Dean Stevens Museum. I am the gardener here in this colonial revival garden. Colonial revival gardens were designed in the end of the 1800s and beginning of the 1900s as a response to the extremely formal gardens of the Victorian era. These gardens used far more informal planting schemes and reflected the desire of the gardeners for a simpler time. The garden contains many perennials, annuals, both bedding annuals and self-seeding annuals, and shrub and climbing roses. The garden is in bloom throughout the year, from the very first bulbs in March until we put the garden to bed in November. This garden was originally installed in the 1920s, but then, like many gardens, it was lost during the difficult years of the Great Depression and World War II. Blueprints were found in the museum attics in the early 1990s, and subsequent to that, the garden was reinstalled. The reinstallation followed the original plan as closely as possible. This garden will be different each month of the growing season. This is a mid-June garden. Let's take some time to explore it. Astilbes are a major accent in the late June garden here in the Cogswell Garden. These plants, with their blooms of white, pale pink, and ruby, are repeated throughout the garden. This repetition of form and color helps tie the garden together. Another plant that fills this role is the Plantagenet hosta. At this time of year, the masses of yellow-green leaves repeat again and again the whole length of the garden. Later in the year, tall flowerscapes will emerge with long, white-scented trumpets. Roses are a major design element in this garden and are used as hedges, to adorn arbors, and as specimen plants in each of the beds. Each one of the beds features an old-fashioned shrub rose. Old-fashioned roses are ones that were old back when this garden was designed in 1920, and indeed some of them date back into the 1500s. This rose, which is in full bloom here in mid-June, is a Madame Plantier rose. It's a fully double white flower with a pale green center, and it's extremely fragrant. Other roses in the garden include a damask rose with pale pink blooms and another white-flowered rose called Madame Hardy. We'll discuss these in more detail when we come to them. The New Dawn rose, which adorns the north arbor with pale pink scented flowers, provides a heavy bloom here in June and then continues to rebloom off and on throughout the summer. Bedding annuals, the ones you buy at the local nursery, are specified extensively in the garden plan. Annuals last for only the current garden season, but provide color throughout that season. In addition to bedding annuals, the garden designer specified self-seeding annuals. These are annuals which grow rapidly from seeds formed the prior year and come into bloom quickly. In this garden, major contributions are made by Larkspur, Love in a Mist, Johnny Jump-Ups, and Forget-Me-Nots, all of them self-seeded annuals. Throughout the garden, these annuals, both bedding plants and self-seeded, will reappear. Later in the summer, flowering garden phlox will be a mainstay of the garden. Now, in late June, an early flowering dwarf variety of phlox is in full bloom. This phlox, which is short enough to be used as a frontal in the garden beds, helps bridge the gap between the late spring and midsummer blooms. Annuals sometimes are the major flower in a bed. This bed should have been filled with delphiniums, but they are difficult to grow in today's climate. Instead, we substitute an annual, which blooms all summer long with wonderful blue spikes. We try to use plants specified in the original plan, but there are times when we need to resort to a replacement strategy that allows the garden to display similar color and form by using a plant that is more successful. This beautiful, strongly scented rose is a Madame Hardy rose. Madame Hardy is not specified in the plan, but rather is a replacement for the Scotch briar rose, which was specified. The Scotch briar rose tends to grow into a thicket and develops long underground runners to do so. The original plant was well on its way to taking over the entire bed in the garden when we removed it. The Madame Hardy rose is much more constrained in its growth habit. This is another example of replacement strategies that allow us to better manage the garden without losing the structure and color intended by the garden designer. This wonderful blue flower is a larkspur. It is one of the self-seeded annuals specified in the garden plan. Since they come from seeds dropped by the prior year's plants, we gardeners are never sure where they will appear each year and how prolific a crop we will have. Regardless, they make a huge addition to this garden. Foxgloves are an enormous part of the June garden. Foxgloves are biennials, plants that live only a couple years before completing their life cycle. Foxgloves were planted in the garden when we originally recreated it in 1999, but many of the ones we have today are self-seeded progeny of the original ones. Hollyhocks are another biennial, and as with the foxglove, most of the plants currently in the garden have grown from seeds dropped by hollyhocks in prior years. It is always interesting to see what color the blooms will be on self-seeded plants. The original hollyhocks had a rose-colored flower, but the current ones have blossoms of pale yellow, salmon, and pink. It'll be a week to 10 days before the first blossoms open on this hollyhock, and it will be interesting to see what color its flowers are. Anchoring the West Arbor is a plant that is fairly uncommon, goatsbeard. This plant is often called false astilbe because the flowers bear a resemblance to astilbe flowers. It is, however, a much bigger and more robust plant. The Harrison yellow roses which hedge the west side of the garden have just completed their bloom, but a few roses linger on to show us their beauty. These old roses traveled west with the pioneers and became the yellow rose of Texas. Valerian is another plant that's rarely seen in today's garden. It is actually an herb and used medicinally as a sedative and to help people go to sleep. Its presence in this garden gives us both white flowers and necessary height at this time of the year. In the front of the garden are garden pinks, a much beloved flower of the garden designer. Some pinks are perennials and form large spreading mats. But other pinks are annuals. Remember that an annual is a plant that grows for only a year and then doesn't return. But these pinks haven't been told that, and this is the third year they've come back to grace the garden. Let's not let them know that they're not supposed to come back. Damask roses are a very old hybrid rose. Their blossoms are so strongly scented that they are often used in perfumery and to make rose water. The flower petals are also edible and may be used as a garnish or made into tea. We simply enjoy them for their wonderful scent and beautiful color. Self-sown annuals often grow up through the perennials in this garden. This combination of perennial lavender, love in a mist, and Johnny jump-ups forms a delightful and unplanned display. Our final plant on this garden tour is a self-seeded annual called Love in a Mist. This little beauty adds a wonderful blue to the spring garden, and the blossoms are followed by an inflated seed head, much desired by flower designers. This garden harkens back to the Colonial Revival garden movement and is a wonderful place to end our garden tour of the Amy Cogswell Garden at the Webdean Stevens Museum. Please feel free to come and visit our garden. It is open every day from dawn to dusk. If you do come, please remember to bring your mask and to remain socially distanced. Thank you.